Well, tomorrow morning, President Cyril Ramaphosa will open the Fourth Industrial Revolution SA Digital Economy Summit for IRSA. The summit, hosted by the Fourth Industrial Revolution South Africa Partnership, is an alliance between private and public partners, academia and civil society seeking to develop an inclusive, coherent and national response to the Fourth Industrial Revolution for South Africa. Now, George Friedman is a US-based geopolitical forecaster and strategist on international affairs. He's the founder and chairman of the Geopolitical Futures, an online publication that analyzes and forecasts the course of global events. He'll be talking, or rather taking part in this summit, and he joins us now in the studio. Very good morning to you. Thanks for making it through jet lag and all.
Well, I'm here.
Yeah. Well, we're a country beset by historical baggage. For instance, one of the biggest conversations here is the reclamation of land. But we're also a country that's forward-looking and wants to take part in the global conversation about new technological developments. What would you say is an ideal position for South Africa to be in?
To be troubled. When you take a look at China, when you take a look at Japan, when you take a look at the United States after the Civil War, all of these countries were deeply troubled, violent, and that created the opening sometimes for something enormous. And I think South Africa is in that position. The very problems it has have within them the core of solutions.
How do we go about that?
Well, the first thing is that in none of those cases did the government really do a lot. Even in China, Deng Xiaoping said, go do your business and make us rich. The first thing is to understand that a centralized government is unlikely to create the revolution that's needed. It will come from entrepreneurs, large and small, and this will be what kicks it off. So what happened in China, for example, was that the centralized government was smashed by Deng Xiaoping to create something else. The centralized government was smashed in the United States. It's very important to understand that we don't know what the Fourth
So we
Industrial
shouldn't be
Revolution
concerned that there are all these disagreements.
Of course you must be concerned by it. You must be concerned about the poverty, the inequality, and all of these things.
Absolutely.
I'm simply saying that in the countries that I've just cited, the same things are there. Do not be frightened by serious problems.
Another disagreement that exists is about the definition of 4IR and how governments are responding to it, if they're doing it sufficiently. What are your thoughts?
We don't know what the Fourth Industrial Revolution will be like. We didn't know that the microchip was going to change our lives.
So you also agree that we're not in it already?
We are in it, but we don't know what it is. When I, in 1970, picked up a calculator with a chip in it, I never imagined how the world would change. So this is the entire problem with revolutions. They're disorderly, they're unpredictable, and they can't be managed. A managed revolution is a contradiction in terms.
So we've just come out of the G8 meeting in Osaka over the weekend. Their biggest emphasis was technology, 4IR and artificial intelligence. Are political resolutions going to be effective in reining in this runaway train? Because so much is coming out on a daily basis.
Well, take a look at the microchip. Yes, the government in the United States had something to do with it. The military, they wanted to build it. Electricity. None of these really had a government deciding what it was going to do. Governments aren't good at deciding what the new technologies are going to be. They're good at creating the framework in which you can develop.
So how can South Africa be competitive in this era?
Well, in two ways. First, you have your very inequality makes it possible. You have very poor people, cheap labor, very competitive in the world market. You also have a very good intellectual foundation. It's very important that the intellectual foundation not make inequality greater by locking people out.
Which it seems to be doing at the moment.
One of the things that has to be done is to see a multi-pronged thing. A simple technical revolution will not change South Africa. Simple, cheap products being sent to the world will not change South America. They have to work together. But no government agency is going to figure out how to make them work together. It'll be one company at a time.
So what are going to be your contributions to the summit tomorrow?
Well, I hope there are some. But what I will really be talking about is the international crisis that this is taking place within. We see the confrontation between the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, what's going on in the Middle East. So When we take a look at the microchip, how it developed out of the Cold War. It's important to understand that crises and instability lead to new technologies, and I'm going to be trying to talk about the crises we're seeing and how they're going to play out.
So South Africa is one of the leading economies on the African continent. At some point we were a leading economy, but have been overtaken by other countries. How will a conversation such as this one, how far will it go in taking South Africa to the top again?
South Africa has to be galvanized into understanding that it's not trapped in the situation it's in, that there are possibilities, that these possibilities are not really imagined, they will come as a surprise, and to participate in it, they must free the country to participate. In other words, the government is critical, but critical in getting out of the way. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be what I think this meeting of anything will achieve. Well, it won't solve any problem, but it's a step in the way.
You say we don't really know what the fourth industrial revolution will bring, but one of the greater concerns, which is a current realistic challenge in South Africa, is joblessness. People worried about machines taking over their roles. What kind of conversations are taking place around this?
I think two. First, ever since the steam engine, people have been afraid they were going to lose their jobs. And every time we did a new technology, suddenly we had an entire class of new workers that were necessary to maintain it. And the second is to understand that you have a multi-layered economy. You have very poor people, and they are not going to be participating in this. You have well-to-do people, and they're not going to be participating in what the poor people do. You have to have multi-layered solutions. For me, the most important thing that you can do for South Africa is take China's place. China developed out of chaos, and it developed by having cheap labor that could outproduce other countries. China is no longer cheap. China has lost that position, but there's always in the world system one country with a large number of workers that can be trained into competing in the international market. Mm-hmm. And that is the beginning, to build a foundation, and out of that foundation will come many other things.
So you spoke earlier about South Africa having an unequal population, and those poorest of the poor that you're talking about, who possibly watching now and thinking at an individual level, the event itself has multiple stakeholders, but at an individual level, if a person wants to make better of their lives, how can they take advantage of technology to do this?
Well, I think not so much technology, but in the essence of technology, organization. And that organization is business. They take advantage of their lives by taking responsibility and finding some niche in which to make their own living and not waiting for someone to give them that. The problem is not inequality, it is lack of upward mobility. People can live with inequality so long as there's hope for them or their children or their grandchildren. And to do that, they have to create the space for it. There was no government program.
Is that the situation in South Africa, though? Because upward mobility assumes that you're already starting from a certain base, whereas some people are starting from nothing.
So they did in China, so they did in Japan, so they did in the United States. Starting from nothing means you can't go down. It's not a trivial matter, but when you take a look at the countries that became massive producers, they began like South Africa is now, with a base that's hungry for something more, but not really able to figure out how, waiting for the government or some large business to organize them.
Yeah. Small
businesses, tiny businesses, these are the beginning.
And we're going to have to thank you on that note. Thank you so much for making the time to come into the studio, Mr. George Friedman, geopolitical forecaster. George Friedman, he'll be taking part in the 4IRSA summit that takes place in Midrand